It started out as a perfect snow day, the kind you see in Christmas movies where everything looks like it's been dipped in powdered sugar. The small town of Silver Pines was blanketed in fresh snow, and the kids were out in force, bundled up in colorful scarves and hats, their laughter echoing through the streets. Among them were Max, Ellie, and Denny, best friends since they were old enough to toddle through the snow. The trio had big plans for the day. They were going to build the biggest, baddest snowman the town had ever seen. "This is gonna be epic," Max said, clapping his gloved hands together. He was the ringleader of the group, always brimming with ideas, some good, some well, not so good. Ellie rolled her eyes but smiled. "Yeah, as long as it doesn't end up looking like the lopsided mess you made last year." "Hey, that was practice," Max shot back. Danny, the quietest of the three, just shrugged. "Let's just get started before the snow gets too hard." They picked a spot in the park, right under the old oak tree. It was the perfect location, flat, open, and right where everyone could see their masterpiece. The kids got to work, rolling the snow into 3 massive balls. Max handled the base, Ellie worked on the middle section, and Danny shaped the head. "Bigger," Max yelled, grunting as he pushed his snowball along. "It's gotta be huge." By the time they stacked the sections together, the snowman stood almost 7 feet tall. They added sticks for arms, stones for buttons, and an old carrot Ellie found in her fridge for the nose. For the finishing touch, Max brought out an old, battered top hat he'd swiped from his dad's garage. "Now that," he said, stepping back to admire their work, "is a snowman." But something about it felt off. Maybe it was the crooked grin they'd given it, or the way its cold eyes seemed to stare a little too intently. Danny was the first to speak up. "Does it look weird to you guys?" Ellie frowned. "Weird how? I don't know. It's like it's watching us." "Don't be ridiculous," Max said, though he couldn't help but glance at the snowman's face. "It's just a snowman. Besides, it's awesome. Everyone's gonna love it." The trio stuck around the park until the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the snow in shades of pink and orange. As the temperature dropped, Ellie shivered. "We should head home," she said, rubbing her arms. "It's freezing." "Yeah, okay," Max agreed, "but tomorrow, we're bringing everyone here to see this thing." They said their goodbyes and trudged off in separate directions. But as they walked away, none of them noticed the faint crunching sound behind them. It was subtle, almost like footsteps in the snow. That night, Ellie couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the snowman, its crooked grin, its lifeless eyes. She told herself it was just her imagination. Snowmen weren't creepy. They were supposed to be fun. But when she glanced out her bedroom window, her breath caught in her throat. The snowman was there. At first, she thought she was mistaken. How could it be? The park was blocks away. But there it was, standing in the middle of her yard, its top hat tilted at an angle, its grin somehow wider than she remembered. Her heart pounded as she closed the curtains and scrambled back into bed. "It's not real," she whispered to herself. "It's not real." The next morning, she rushed to her front yard, but the snowman was gone. Only a faint trail of disturbed snow led back toward the park. When she met Max and Danny at their usual spot, she blurted out, "It was in my yard." "What was?" Max asked, confused. "The snowman," Ellie said. "It was standing right outside my window last night." Max laughed, but it was forced. "Yeah, okay. Did it knock on your door too?" "I'm serious," Ellie snapped. "I don't know how, but it was there." Danny frowned. "I heard something last night too, like footsteps in the snow. I thought it was just the wind, but now I'm not so sure." Max waved them off. "You guys are just freaking yourselves out. It's just a snowman. It can't move." Ellie wasn't convinced, but she let it go for now. That evening, the three of them returned to the park to check on the snowman. It was still there, exactly where they'd left it. But something was different. Did we put the arms like that? Ellie asked, staring at the snowman's twig-like arms. They were raised now almost as if it was reaching for something or someone. Daddy shook his head. No, we didn't. Maybe someone's messing with us, Max said, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. Or maybe it's cursed, Ellie muttered. Max scoffed. Come on, don't be ridiculous. But deep down, they all felt it. There was something wrong with the snowman. That night, Max woke up to a loud thud outside his window. Groggy, he stumbled to the window and pulled back the curtain. His stomach dropped. The snowman was there, its grin impossibly wide, its coal eyes boring into him. Its stick arms were pressed against the glass, like it was trying to get in. Max screamed, stumbling back and grabbing his phone. He called Ellie and Danny, his voice shaking as he told them what was happening. We need to destroy it, Ellie said firmly. Meet me at the park. The three of them met under the old oak tree, armed with shovels and a sledgehammer Max had taken from his dad's garage. But when they got to the spot where the snowman had been, it was gone. Fresh tracks led away from the park, disappearing into the woods. I'm not going in there, Danny said, his voice trembling. We have to, Ellie said. We made it. It's our responsibility. Reluctantly, they followed the tracks, the cold night air biting at their faces. The deeper they went, the darker it got. The trees loomed overhead, their branches like skeletal fingers, and then they saw it. The snowman stood in a clearing, its grin twisted into something malevolent. The air around it felt colder, like it was sucking the warmth from the world. Max took a step forward, gripping the sledgehammer. We end this, now. As he swung the hammer, the snowman's eyes seemed to glow, and a deep, guttural sound echoed through the woods. The hammer connected, shattering the snowman's head, but the sound only grew louder. The snow around them began to swirl, rising into the air like a blizzard. The kids screamed as the snowman reformed before their eyes, larger and more menacing than before. Ellie grabbed the carrot nose and hurled it into the trees. It's the hat, she shouted over the wind. Take off the hat, Danny lunged forward, snatching the top hat from the snowman's head. The moment it left, the snowman collapsed into a pile of harmless snow. The wind died down, and the woods fell silent. They buried the hat deep in the woods, far away from town. None of them spoke about what had happened, not to their parents, not to their friends. But every Christmas, when the first snow fell, they couldn't help but glance over their shoulders, half expecting to see the snowman's crooked grin staring back at them. If there was one thing Maggie Miller loved, it was Christmas. Every December, her little house on Chestnut Lane became the talk of the neighborhood, glowing with enough lights to rival the North Star. Her decorations were famous, a mix of vintage ornaments, oversized candy canes, and, of course, the string lights. Every year, she would add a new strand or two to her already impressive collection, weaving them across her porch, roof line, and even the old oak tree in her yard. Mom, are you sure we need more lights? Her daughter Chloe asked, watching as Maggie unpacked a brand new box of multicolored LEDs. Of course, we do, Maggie said, her eyes sparkling with excitement. It's tradition, and besides, these were on sale. Chloe rolled her eyes but smiled. She knew better than to argue. Christmas was Maggie's thing, and nothing, not even a skeptical teenager, was going to dim her holiday spirit. That afternoon, Maggie climbed up on the ladder, stringing the new lights along the roof line. Chloe stood at the base, holding the ladder steady and trying not to look bored. Careful, Mom, she said as Maggie leaned a little too far to the side. I'm fine, Maggie said, though her heart raced as the ladder wobbled. Almost done. As she reached the end of the strand, Maggie plugged the lights into the nearest outlet. They flickered to life, casting the yard in a rainbow of colors. But as she stepped back to admire her work, something caught her eye. One of the lights, just one, wasn't the same as the others. It glowed a deep, pulsing red, almost like a heartbeat. "How," Maggie said, leaning closer. "That's weird." "What is?" Chloe asked, craning her neck to see ... "This one light. It's single quotes S ... different." Chloe squinted. "Looks fine to me." Maggie frowned but shrugged it off. "Must be my imagination." That night, as the neighborhood lights came on, Maggie's house once again became the centerpiece of Chestnut Lane. Neighbors stopped by to compliment her handiwork. Kids pointed in awe, and even Chloe couldn't help but snap a picture for her social media. But Maggie couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. That single red light stood out like a drop of blood on fresh snow. She tried to ignore it, but it seemed to draw her gaze, its steady pulsing almost hypnotic. When she finally went to bed, the light was the last thing she saw before closing the curtains. The next morning, Maggie woke up to find the red light wasn't just pulsing anymore, it was glowing brighter, its light spilling across the snow like crimson paint. She stared at it, unease creeping up her spine. "Maybe it's just defective," she muttered to herself. But when she tried to remove it, the light wouldn't budge. No matter how hard she twisted, it stayed firmly in place, almost as if it had fused with the strand. Frustrated, Maggie gave up and decided to call the store where she'd bought the lights. But when she looked at the box, her stomach sank. There was no brand name, no instructions, just a plain white box with a single word scrawled across it in messy handwriting: Illumina. "Great," she muttered, tossing the box aside. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the red light seemed to grow even brighter. It cast long, eerie shadows across the yard, making the cheerful decorations look distorted and wrong. Maggie tried to focus on dinner, but Chloe's voice broke through her thoughts. "Mom, have you noticed anything ... weird about the lights?" she asked, poking at her mashed potatoes. Maggie hesitated. "Weird how? I don't know. It's just that red one freaks me out." Maggie sighed. "It's just a light, Chloe. Probably a manufacturing defect." "Yeah, well, it feels like it's watching us." Maggie laughed, though it came out forced. "Don't be silly. Lights don't watch people." But that night, as she lay in bed, Maggie couldn't help but feel the same thing. She peeked out the window, and there it was, the red light, brighter than ever, its glow spilling into her room. It felt alive, almost like it was pulsing in time with her heartbeat. She closed the curtains and tried to sleep, but the light seemed to seep through even with the curtains drawn. When she finally drifted off, her dreams were filled with strange, flickering images: trees wrapped in glowing veins, houses swallowed by light, and a figure standing in her yard, staring up at her window. The next morning, Maggie woke up feeling exhausted. She stumbled into the kitchen to find Chloe already awake, her face pale. "Mom," Chloe said, her voice trembling. "The lights ... they're moving." "What?" Maggie asked, blinking. "Look." Maggie followed her daughter to the window. Her stomach dropped. The lights, her beautiful Christmas lights, were no longer strung neatly across the house. They snaked across the yard like living things, their colors shifting and twisting. And at the center of it all was the red light, now glowing so brightly it hurt to look at. Maggie grabbed her coat and stormed outside, determined to fix whatever was going on. But as she reached for the lights, they recoiled, snapping back like a startled animal. "What the hell?" she whispered. Over the next few days, the lights became more erratic. They moved on their own, wrapping around trees and lampposts, even creeping toward the neighbors' yards. The red light grew brighter and brighter, casting an eerie glow over the entire street. People started to notice. Neighbors stopped by to ask if everything was okay, their eyes darting nervously toward the glowing mass of lights. Maggie didn't know what to tell them. "It's just a malfunction," she lied, forcing a smile. But deep down, she knew it was something more. The lights weren't just malfunctioning, they were alive. On Christmas Eve, the lights reached their peak. They covered Maggie's house and yard entirely, their glow visible from blocks away. The red light pulsed like a heartbeat, Its glow so intense it painted the snow crimson. Chloe begged her mom to leave, but Maggie refused. "This is my house," she said firmly. "I'm not letting something scare me away." That night, as the clock struck midnight, the lights came alive in a way Maggie had never seen. They writhed and twisted, their colors shifting and blending, until the entire yard looked like it was on fire. The red light flared, and for a moment, Maggie thought she saw something in the glow, a face, twisted and malevolent, staring back at her. The next morning, Chestnut Lane was eerily quiet. The lights were gone, as if they had never been there. Maggie's house was dark and silent, the decorations nowhere to be found. When the neighbors came to check on her, they found the house empty. Maggie and Chloe were gone, their footprints leading away from the house and vanishing into the woods. To this day, no one knows what happened to them. Some say the lights took them, swallowed them up in their endless glow. Others say they fled, too terrified to ever return. But every Christmas, when the first snow falls, a strange glow can be seen in the woods near Chestnut Lane. Some say it's just a trick of the light, others know better. Let me tell you a story about the Crying Bridge. It's one of those places that everyone in town talks about, especially around Christmas. You know the type, a lonely old bridge shrouded in mist, with a tragic history and a ghostly legend. I didn't believe any of it at first. I mean, come on, ghosts crying. It sounded like something straight out of a cheap horror movie. But then I made the mistake of going there one cold December night, and let's just say, I'll never doubt a ghost story again. It all started when my friend Sam dared me to go. We were hanging out at his place, sipping hot chocolate and complaining about how boring our little town was. "You know what we should do," Sam said, his eyes lighting up with mischief. "We should check out the Crying Bridge." I groaned. "Not this again. There's no ghost, Sam. It's just an old bridge." "Then prove it," he said, smirking. "Let's go tonight. You, me, and Lisa. If you're so sure there's nothing out there, what's the harm?" I glanced at Lisa, who was curled up on the couch scrolling through her phone. She looked up and shrugged. "Could be fun. Besides, I heard the crying gets louder around Christmas." "See," Zen said, clapping his hands. "Even Lisa's on board. So what do you say?" I sighed. "Fine, but when nothing happens, you're buying me hot chocolate for a week." That night, the three of us piled into Sam's old pickup truck and headed out to the bridge. It was a bitterly cold evening, the kind where the air bites at your skin and your breath fogs up like smoke. The road to the bridge was barely more than a dirt path, winding through the woods like a snake. By the time we reached it, the trees were so thick that the headlights barely pierced the darkness. "There it is," Sam said, pulling to a stop. The bridge was just as creepy as I'd imagined. It was an old wooden thing sagging under the weight of time and neglect. A thin layer of snow coated the planks, and the creek below was frozen solid. But the thing that really struck me was the silence. No wind, no animals, just the oppressive quiet of the forest. "Okay, we're here," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. "Now what?" "Now we wait," Sam said, grinning. "The legend says you have to stand in the middle of the bridge and listen. If the ghost thinks you're worthy, you'll hear her crying." "Worthy of what?" Lisa asked, pulling her coat tighter. Sam shrugged. "No, maybe she's looking for someone to take her place." "Very comforting," I muttered, but I wasn't about to back out. If Sam wanted to play ghost hunter, fine, I'd play along. We climbed out of the truck and made our way to the bridge. The wood creaked under our boots, and every step sent a shiver up my spine. When we reached the middle, Sam stopped and held up his phone. "Okay, everybody be quiet," he said. "We need to listen." Lisa rolled her eyes but stayed silent. I shoved my hands in my pockets and stared out at the frozen creek. trying to ignore the way my heart was pounding. The minutes dragged by, and the silence pressed down on us like a weight. Then we heard it. At first, it was so faint I thought I was imagining it a soft, mournful wail carried on the wind. But as we stood there, the sound grew louder, clearer. It was unmistakable now, the sound of a woman crying. "Holy crap," Lisa whispered. "Do you hear that?" Sam nodded, his face pale. "It's her." I wanted to say something to laugh it off, to call it a trick of the wine, but the sound was too real. It wasn't just crying, it was heartbroken, guttural, like someone mourning a loss too great to bear. And then, just as suddenly as it started, the crying stopped. The silence returned, heavier than before. "Okay, we heard it," I said, my voice shaky. "Can we go now?" But Sam wasn't listening. He was staring at something on the far end of the bridge, his eyes wide. "What is it?" Lisa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's someone there," Sam said. I turned to look, and my stomach dropped. At the edge of the bridge, just barely visible in the dim light, was the figure of a woman. She was dressed in a long white gown that billowed in the wind, her hair hanging loose around her face. She didn't move, didn't make a sound. She just stood there, staring at us. "We need to go," I said, grabbing Sam's arm. "Now?" But Sam didn't budge. She's beautiful," he said, his voice distant. "Sam," I shouted, shaking him, snap out of it. Finally he blinked and looked at me, his face pale and confused. What just happened?" "No idea," I said, dragging him toward the truck. "But we're leaving." We piled back into the truck and sped away, the bridge disappearing behind us. No one spoke on the drive back, and when we finally got to Sam's house, we sat in silence for a long time. "What the hell was that?" Lisa finally asked. "I don't know," I said. "But I'm never going back there." Sam didn't say anything. He just stared out the window, a haunted look in his eyes. Over the next few days, things got weird. Sam stopped coming to school, stopped answering his phone. When Lisa and I went to check on him, his mom said he was sick, but I could tell she was worried. When we finally saw him, he looked terrible, pale, gaunt, like he hadn't slept in days. "I keep hearing her," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "At night, when I'm alone, she's crying, calling for me." "Sam, it's just your imagination," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. "No," he said, shaking his head. "She wants me to come back." That night, I had the dream. I was back on the bridge, standing in the cold. The woman was there, her face hidden by her hair. She raised her head, and I saw her eyes empty, hollow, like black pits. "Come back," she whispered, her voice echoing in my head. I woke up drenched in sweat, her voice still ringing in my ears. When I called Lisa the next morning, she admitted she'd had the same dream. We decided to check on Sam, but when we got to his house, his mom was frantic. "He's gone," she said, tears streaming down her face. I woke up, and he was gone. Lisa and I didn't need to guess where he'd gone. We drove to the bridge, the truck skidding on the icy road. When we got there, Sam's truck was parked at the edge, the engine still running. We ran onto the bridge, calling his name. And then we saw at his jacket, lying on the planks. But Sam was nowhere to be found. The police searched for weeks but never found a trace of him. The official story was that he'd fallen into the creek and been swept away. But Lisa and I knew better. The crying bridge had taken him. To this day, I can't drive past that bridge without hearing her cries, without seeing her face in my nightmares. And every Christmas, I leave a light burning in my window for Sam, and for anyone else who's ever heard the crying bridge's call.